Hi, welcome to Microaces Workshop. My name's John, and today I want to show you how to make the Microaces Scrappee trainer. So without further ado, let us get down onto the building board. So here we are on the building board. Let's remove the finished item and clear the board ready for the new build. Before we do we get into building the aircraft itself, let me show you all of the tools that are required for the build. Very quickly, we've got the glue that will allow us to stick everything together on the kit. Yoo-hoo Paul. It's a fantastic glue. It's foam safe, and as I said, it is used to stick everything. So there's our glue. We need a good hobby knife or scalpel, fresh blade for every build. Foam is easy to cut, but it also can tear quite readily as well if the knife's not sharp enough. So fresh blade, sanding stick or nail file, as this is, does exactly that. Files down the not your nails but the foam in the kit. Also very useful, a pair of tweezers. This is a sort of standard pair of plastic medical tweezers, or whatever you can get your hands on. And there are a couple of items that are also fairly essential. A straight edge. I like to use a clear one because this is mainly used for scoring the foam, and being clear, it's slightly milky, but being clear, it allows you to see what's underneath, what you've already scored. So that's very useful. A standard pair of pliers. In this build there's only one reason for using these, and that's on the control wires right at the end when we're hooking up the receiver to the tail feathers. But those will be useful, small or large, but obviously with these are what's termed narrow nose or needle nose pliers, something that's got a little bit of control on the at the nose. And also not essential, but can be quite handy, and some of you might be surprised at this, lighter fluid and a paintbrush. We'll come to why we use that, or what it can be used for in the build. So a little bit of a surprise there. So there we go, there are our tools. Let's get on and have a look at the kit itself. So once you open the box with your Scrappee in, and I'm going to show you the Scrappee Classic, but of course we've also got the Patriot as well. You'll notice several bags of bits and pieces. This should be familiar once you've opened it up. This is the bits bag. This is all the loose parts that come with the kit. Let's just drag all that out. We'll have a quick look at what we've got. There are a couple of pieces of steel piano wire. Those are the control rods. They've got some little U-bends and Z-bends at the end. You'll notice that the Z-bends are at different orientations to one another. They're at 90 degrees to one another. They are for the control of the elevator and the rudder. We have a piece of carbon fibre strip. That's used on the elevator to stiffen that up. And then in this little bag here we've got all sorts of bits and pieces. We've got some little hook and loop bits. Two are the loop and one is the hook. We have a carbon fibre axle, which is 2mm diameter and cut to length. And then we have a couple of sponge balls. Now these actually become the tyres, and you'll notice when you have a look at them that they've both got holes through the centre of them, and we'll look at how they all go together in the video. You've got a piece of laser cut plywood, which is the motor mount, and then in here we have some 3D printed parts. These are the wheel hubs and the retainers at the back there, and then you have two sets of magnets. You have some 4mm diameter and some 3mm diameter magnets that go to hold the hatch on. So there's plenty of magnetic force there to keep that hatch on the plane in flight. So let's just pop all of those back in there for now. Right, here we go. This is the main part of the kit. Obviously, the first thing you can see there is the assembly guide. Let's just move that to one side. And within the assembly guide, which is used to protect all of the parts, we have the parts themselves. So we've got two sheets here that are port and starboard wing and the tail feathers. They're made of a 1mm Depron, and they are printed on both sides and laser cut nice and accurately. And we then have a plastics sheet. A lot of this material is used to reinforce the aircraft, but some of it is also used functionally too. We'll see more about that in the build. You have a 2mm Depron sheet, which once again is laser cut. A lot of that has to do with the airframe, the internals of the aircraft itself. You have a sticker sheet. All the stickers are numbered and obviously referenced in the manual itself. And then you have the fuselage sprue as well, which has, as I said, it's all been pre-printed, laser cut, so that you end up with a very attractive aircraft once it's built. And of course, the most important thing is the assembly guide, which actually takes you through the build, and we've been very careful in this one to keep in mind that this could be your first build. So we've tried to explain everything as easily as possible using minimum words, many pictures, so hopefully at the end of the build you have an aircraft that you can easily fly, learn to fly, and really enjoy. Okay, so that's what you get in the box. If you've also ordered the aircraft with the flight pack, then you'll get a little box like this as well. And within this little box, if I can get it open, you have the motor gearbox, you have the electronics. This is the receiver. It has two onboard servos. If I actually bring that closer, it's quite a feat of technology. You can see here you've got two onboard servos there and there. This is the battery wire, so the battery connects and powers the unit via that cable. You've also got some additional ports as well, so this is actually a 5-channel unit. We'll only be using 3 channels, and the little black plug there, that's actually the connector for the motor. So this also not only has the receiver with 2 onboard servos, but it also has the electronic speed controller integrated into it as well, which is amazing. We have a little double-sided sticky pad to help you attach the receiver to the aircraft itself, and of course we have the absolutely necessary prop and the rubber prop adapter, which allows you to fit the prop onto the prop shaft on the motor gearbox. So there we go. Let's get on to the build. The first step we need to achieve is to build the airframe of the aircraft. This comprises mainly of the 2mm foam that's unprinted that you'll find in the kit. The airframe itself is a support for the fuselage mainly, and the foam itself is not particularly sturdy, so we beef it up with the plastics that are included in the kit, which you'll find look like this. So the first stage is to put some reinforcement on the main keel of the aircraft. That part is known as D1, which you'll see in the manual. Using our knife with the fresh blade, we can remove the part from the sprue. You can either cut precisely along the shape itself, or just roughly cut it from the sprue, and then once you've got the main sprue out of the way, you can then do your trimming. So you'll see in the manual it will show you what the part looks like off the sprue, so you can match it to your cutting. So there we go. There we have the main keel of the aircraft, which runs down the centre of the fuselage, and we reinforce that either side using the two parts on the plastic sprue, P1. So there should be two P1s on the sprue, and just remove them like so. And then trim them as required. There we go. So each of these sits either side on the keel at the bottom. The shape corresponds to the shape of the foam part, and to attach we use our good old trusty Yoo-hoo paw. Now this is a new tube for me, so sometimes with new tubes the glue tends to come out quite quickly. To apply here, what we want to do is put a smear of glue all along the bottom of the keel, and then attach the part. So to smear, what I tend to do is just put the nozzle up onto the part and then drag, and that leaves a good flat smear of glue all along the areas that I need it. Obviously you want to be as sparing as possible. This is an aircraft, a micro aircraft that has to fly, so you don't want it weighing of mostly glue. And if we put this on while the glue is wet, this gives us a little bit of time to maneuver this into position before the glue completely dries, and makes that task a lot more difficult. So I'm just making sure that the part sits right along that edge. You'll notice here we've got a little bit of a protrusion, which is as it should be. And you'll notice that the plastic doesn't go all the way to the tail, and there's a reason for that, and I'll show you that later. So there we go, nice and flat. It's best if it sets flat like that, because obviously we want the keel to be straight, and we can turn it over and do exactly the same on the other side. Now what you'll notice, once these two pieces of the plastic material have been attached, is that the actual foam itself becomes a lot stiffer and a lot more structurally sound. So we'll lay it down flat. Any excess glue that you get, you can actually just wipe off onto your hand, and then it should bead up and fall away. But as you can see, that is a lot stiffer now, and once the glue dries, it'll be a decent structure. Right, we can set that aside, leave that to dry. The next stage is to start adding the formers which sit across the keel, and the first one that we're going to do is also support for the undercarriage. This is part D2, which is this part on our foam sheet. So we're going to remove that, and this is where you really do need the sharp knife. This kind of material, if you haven't got a sharp knife, you can make a complete mess of it. So make sure that that blade is sharp. So there we go, we've got our D2 structure, and that is actually reinforced using this P4 element here. Now this is probably the most complicated part of the kit. There's a bit of folding required here, and the part itself you'll see is cut and scored, and you can see the score lines quite clearly. The way it folds together allows it to sit onto the foam part there, and also support the undercarriage, which will form from all the other parts that go together on the kit. But where you see the score lines, what you need to do is fold the parts, or fold the part. You can see it's a bit of origami. There's a little tab here that you hopefully can see. Now that folds inside there and then gets surrounded by the tab there, you can see. So that's essentially how it's supposed to form up. The only area that needs gluing at this stage is these two parts, or it's a single part that folds over on itself, and that needs to be glued together. So that's what we'll do. Once again, we need a good smear of glue. This time you can be quite generous, because this is a very structural element of the aircraft itself. It's the undercarriage. It will take a beating, and so it's good to get it put together solidly. I put glue on the one surface here, and what I'm going to do is temporarily fold it over onto the other surface, and that should actually transfer some of the glue over onto that second surface. What I'll do now is I'll let this dry, because Yoo-Hoo is a contact adhesive as well as a normal adhesive. If we let it dry and then fold it over, we'll get an instant grip, and the part will be together firmly. so we don't actually have to hold it or pin it or do anything of that sort. So we'll do the same on the other side. Fold all our bits, or pre-fold all of the bits, and then add the glue. To one side, fold it over to transfer, and then open it out and let it dry. Don't forget, when we go for the final fold, to trap that little tag on the main leg of the undercarriage in between the two parts, sandwiching it together. And once that's done, you can see that this just fits neatly onto the foam part, D2, and we'll be able to glue that on. Okay, now it doesn't normally take too long for this glue to dry, or certainly become tacky enough that it will stay in position. So I'm going to press those parts together, and they should hold nicely. Just to make sure that tag is in there, or tab is in there too. Let's go for the second one. Bend that over a little bit more, make it a sharper bend. Try that again. There we go. All solid in place. Now we can attach using U-hoop pull once again. Just add a smear of the glue onto the areas that the plastic part comes in contact with. And once again, you can actually be quite generous with the glue here because it's structural. And that should neatly pop on there. And we can let that dry off before we attach it to the keel. Okay, before we attach this to the keel, there's another stage we need to go through, and that's to attach another foam component to the front of this assembly, and that's this part here. This is D3, and I've cut that from the sprue. The other thing that I wanted to show you that we can actually use to tidy up the parts once they're off the sprue is our sanding stick, and just using either side of the stick itself. If you've got a one that's got different grit on either side, it shouldn't matter. You can just gently remove any excess material just like that. Very easy to sand the foam. Right, this part pops on to the front here. Once again, lining up the holes and those two surfaces there. There is a difference at the top here, and that is as it should be. And all we do to bring those two together is once again just add some U-hoop or around the surface like so. And because it's a larger surface area, we can be a little more sparing with the glue. Bring those two together like so, making sure everything lines up as it should do. And once again, that can be put aside to set before we attach it to the keel. So now our parts are nicely adhered together, we can go ahead and install them onto the keel. Now you'll notice the slot centrally on this part. The two pieces of foam that we put together create a little step. They're not absolute replicas of each other. So, and you'll notice on the keel itself, you've got a step too. That helps with orientation, and essentially it means that the only way that you can pop that in is this way round. Now it is quite a tight fit, but that's all good, and at the moment we're just dry fitting it so that you can see how it goes. The surface here should fall level with the top of the keel. That's how it's been designed, so you know when it's in the position it should be in, and it should be sitting fairly upright on the keel. There shouldn't be too much in the way of movement, but so that's dry fitted. I'm happy with that, so I can now pull that apart and add some glue to the area, and then bring the two parts together, and obviously then let everything set. And you'll notice with the Yoo-hoo glue, if you do bring together parts quite quickly after you've applied the glue, it can take a while to set, and that's fine for parts like this, because there's no real need to hold it in place. It's a tight fit so that it'll stay in place while the glue sets. So it's fine to do that. We don't need to use the contact adhesive properties of the Yoo-hoo in this instance, but we can just let that set, and we can prepare all the other parts that we need to attach to this keel to create the airframe. So we can move through our list of parts here, take off our D4 parts, which are these here. Now these form part of the nose structure. And just as a note, as you can see, I've just been rather cack-handed and managed to break that piece there, or certainly damage it. So what I can actually do is just do a quick repair on it, just by putting a tiny piece or a tiny drop of glue in the area and repositioning it. So when it comes to using this part, everything will be set. So I'll just return this back to where it should be and try and be a little more careful next time. Good. Okay. Back to my D4 parts. Let's give these a little bit of a sand to take off the excess remaining from the sprue. Now these have a little bit of reinforcement to them as well. These being in the nose, and obviously the nose is something that takes quite a bit of impact, so we're going to use these little P6 parts off our plastics sprue. And as you can see, they're cut. They have a very small score that you can fold there. So we're not gluing this, so it just sits at a right angle to the part. In fact, before I do that, I've just noticed I've been a little inaccurate in my trimming, so I'll just take that little slither off and then bend each of those along the score line on the part there. Now each one of these should sit on the part corresponding to the shape right at the nose section there, as you can see, and that little folded part just reinforces this area here, and its requirement will become clear as we progress with the build. So let's just add a tad of glue on the area that this part sits on. And then just match it up, pop it on. There we go. Make sure that curves around there. We didn't add any glue. And that's the beauty of Yoo-Hoo, is that we can now take that part off because nothing's set just yet, and we can just add a little bit of glue on that return there where the little folded piece of plastic will sit. As you can see, the properties of the Yoo-Hoo have changed slightly, and it grabs more now that it's drying. So there we go, there's one done. So it's just dry fit to make sure. I always dry fit, just to make sure everything is as it should be. There's no trimming or sanding needed to make for a good fit. So even on something like that that's quite simple. Also, obviously, I do a lot of prototype building, so sometimes the parts I've designed don't exactly fit as I wanted them to. Don't forget, we've got to put it on that little return. Just there, that's it. And then on goes the part. There we go. Right, set those aside, let them dry, go and have a cup of tea. Or, while they're drying, we could prepare the other parts we need for fitting. So, D4s, we'll cut out our D5. D6 too. There's our D6, there's our D6. Let me just swap that over so you can see D6. There we go. This actually sits right at the nose of the aircraft. So, the other parts that we'll need are D7 and D8, which are these parts here. There you go. And also D9, which is this bit here. go. Now these parts all go to build up the nose area of the Scrappee, and we'll start by, as you can see, I've already dry fitted this particular part here, D5, but before we install this we need to do a couple of things to it. Firstly, we need to bring together both D7 and D8. They literally sit on top of one another. So what we'll do is just add some glue to one side of one of the two parts, and add the other part, and you can see there's a semicircle cut out of both parts, and they should line up, and that'll bring everything else together as it should be, sitting centrally together. That actually slots into this area here, just like that on D5. There we go. Okay, let's glue it. A little smear of Yoo-hoo. You'll notice when I'm applying, well, you probably can't see this because it's being videoed from above, but I've got a nice full tube of Yoo-hoo pour, and what I'm doing is, rather than tipping it and watching it all run out all over the place, I'm actually keeping it fairly upright, or certainly pointing up, using gravity to my advantage, and then just lightly squeezing out what's needed, and then popping the cap back on as soon as it's been used. It's a bit of a fiddle, but once you get used to it, it's well worth it. It means that the glue stays nice and fluid, it doesn't get too tacky, and you're not having to squeeze the tube so hard that it all comes out at once you reach the required pressure. Okay, so we've got our little stack of foam there. Once again, you'd notice when I inserted it, there is only one way you can insert it because of this stepped area that's been cut out of the D5 part, and that means that the slightly larger D7 sits behind the slightly narrower D8, so it all fits nicely. Now this part then sits onto our frame by this tongue here slotting between the former like that, and then this slot here should actually go over the front area of the keel there, the stepped area, and that should sit nicely. Now I've noticed that, I don't know whether you can see that, there is a little bit of the D7, D8 part protruding out of the bottom there that's preventing this sitting absolutely flush. So what I'm going to do is just take our sander and sanding stick and just sand that back so it's flush. There we go. As I said, this Depron or foam sands really nicely. So happy with that, I can then apply some glue to the area that is going to sit into on our frame. So we've got the tongue that goes through here that sits on that former. Then we've got it coming along here. There's a hole in the D5 part, so I'm going to just avoid putting glue there because it wouldn't matter, but it's just extra weight. And as I have said before, with aircraft this small, the lighter that you can keep it, the better it will perform. So, well, the better it'll perform in the air anyway. Okay, glue applied. top back on, and then we will just slot that in there, push that all into place. There we go. So just to give you a quick look of how that all sits together, see there should be a little bit of a protrusion of the keel out the front there because we still have a part to go on the nose. Okay, and the next process is to just pop these side cheeks onto the aircraft. As you can see, I'm just dry fitting them just to make sure. As you can see, there's a nice tight fit there, and what we want to make sure is that they sit correctly on the side here. There we go. Well, I'm happy. So that area of the part there just sits flush against the former, and obviously that tongue area sits in that the voided area there. So let's get those stuck down. And when you are gluing a part together, it's entirely up to you which part you apply the glue to and which part you then attach. And I'm going for the double here, so I'm going to glue both areas at the same time because I've obviously got some working time using U-Hoo Pour. There we go. And I'm going to assemble these with the plastic sitting on the inside, like so. And if you look directly from the side, which obviously I'm not doing at the moment, but I'm showing you, you want to make sure that both of these parts mirror each other so that they both sit at the same height. And whilst that's drying, we're going to add our plastic part P5 onto our D6. Okay, let's just tidy that up a bit. That's what you've got to be careful of, and that's why we use the plastic to reinforce. So you can see I've slightly damaged the foam part, but now it's attached to the plastic. All is well and good again. So we'll just let that dry off, and then we can attach that too. Whilst that's drying, we are going to prepare our part here, D9. Just make sure those tabs are well and truly off, and then this little part sits atop the side cheeks. As you can see, it's quite a tight fit. Such a tight fit, I think I'm going to do a little bit of sanding. So I'm just going to take these tabs down a tiny bit from the back. So this little platform that we're putting in at the moment, this is actually where the receiver will sit, and the receiver itself has onboard servos to control the tail feathers. So that's a nice little platform there. easily accessible once the aircraft is fully assembled, and very simple. So that's the dry fit. Let's add a little bit of the goop, the areas that will come into contact. Now you will notice with the Yoo-hoo pour it sometimes strings a little, and you can just wipe these little webs away very easily. The thicker you let the glue get, the more stringy it becomes. So that's one good reason for putting your cap back on as quickly as possible. There we go, our little platform is in place. Let that dry off. Now, the little nose piece that we've created here, we want the plastic part to sit on the inside once again of the nose, so it actually should slot in here. So that's where it should sit. And what you might be able to see is that there is a little gap here. So these parts are sitting a little bit too low on the fuselage. So what we can do is, they should still have a little bit of flexibility to move up, because the glue isn't entirely set yet. So we can actually make a few little adjustments. Now, let's see how that fares. Plastic on the inside. There, that's a much better fit. Let's get our adhesive on there, get that all fixed up. Okay. Here we go. Fantastic. So that's looking all square, neat, strong. Our nose area is done, and we can move on to the rest of the structure. So what do we need? Let's have a look. Some more of our 2mm foam, and it's essentially all these bits here. 1, 2, 3, 4 formers. 1, 2, 3, 4 formers. So I'm going to remove this as a block. There we go. Didn't go through. There we go. And this last one here. D13. There we go. Unlucky for some. Let's just tidy these all up. And you don't have to press too hard with the knife to go through the foam, but what I do suggest is that you keep the knife at a fairly obtuse angle on the foam, or is it an acute angle, so that you're using quite a lot of the blade. Going in a little more upright, you can drag the surface of the foam and create a bit of a mess of the whole part, certainly on the edge. Not that that's a massive issue, because obviously all of these parts get covered by the exterior surfaces of the model, but it's always nice to have a clean part to work with. This is D10. D10 is the next part that goes onto the frame. We'll just dry fit this, and once again you should get it. The bottom surface of the part should hit the bottom of the keel, and the top surface of the part here, or the bottom surface of the voided area, should sit neatly at the top of the keel, as it does. So add a tiny bit of adhesive, and then slot the part in. There we go. And then it's always nice just to check that it's square, sitting where it should do, and then it can be left to set while we move on. Now this is a small part, so it's best to be as careful with it as possible because it is delicate. Fantastic. Well, there we have an almost complete fuselage airframe of the Microaces Scrappee. Okay, we have a few more bits to add before we've completed our frame. But what I'm going to do, once again, this is optional, but as you may have noted earlier when we were applying the plastic to the keel, I noted that the plastic doesn't go all the way to the rear of the keel itself. And the reason for that is it allows us to sand in a point to the back of the keel. Now it's optional. You don't actually have to do this, but once again it makes it slightly more aesthetically pleasing at the back of the aircraft once the skin is on, and it also increases the surface area that the skin of the aircraft comes into contact with at the rear of the aircraft too. So it's not a bad thing to do, but as I said, it's not absolutely necessary. Then what we need to do before we skin the aircraft is to put the rudder hinge on, and also a little sticker that goes over the rudder hinge just to hide it once the rudder's installed. So that's a part called P3. You can see here on the sprue. It's sort of a lozenge shape with the centre taken out, and it's also, if you look at it, been scored twice. Now the reason for that is so that it can be bent, and that little area in the centre there that's scored becomes the hinge for the rudder itself. So the hinge attaches to the rear of the fuselage keel around about centre, with the actual scored area of the hinge sitting about 1 millimetre out from the rear of the keel. So we just glue that on directly using our U-hoo. This time I probably recommend using it as contact adhesive, so we'll add some glue onto one half of the hinge, and then we'll go and dab this onto where we want to stick it, just there. and then we'll remove it, and we'll let that dry off, and then bring it together once the glue is dry. Now, in your bag of bits that you get with the Scrappee kit, you get a couple of these little neodymium magnets. I'm sure that's how you say it. I'm sure that's not how you say it, but a couple of those. And whilst our hinge is drying, I'm just going to pop those into the two little holes on the forward face of the first structure there, the first former on the fuselage. So I'm going to pop a little bit of glue into each of those holes. There and there. And then pop the magnets in there, and then once they're in, we're going to cover those with a couple of stickers. On your little sticker pack, you should have some S1 stickers, 3 of them in total. We only actually need 2 of them, but to get the stickers off, the easiest way is to actually bend at the edge of the sticker that you need, and then just use your fingernail to tease it off. There we go. And one of the best ways of applying stickers is to actually use a pair of tweezers. It's not essential, but it makes placement a lot easier. And then I can just pop that on over the magnet itself. And what that does is it just prevents the magnet from actually coming out of the hole that it's situated in. The glue normally does a good job of holding it there, but it just creates a little barrier. Right, now our glue is dried on the hinge, the tail area, on the rudder hinge. We can then place it where we need it, push it down, and it immediately grabs, and we've got our little hinge in place there, ready for rudder installation later on in the build. This also is covered over with a sticker, S2, and use the same technique, just peeling off the sticker, then pop that over the hinge, and there we go. And all that does is it just colours the hinge to match the rudder once it's installed, hiding it essentially, making things a little neater. Right, last part of building up the airframe is to put the tail wheel on. And the tail wheel is P2, you can see on the plastic sprue, and we can just remove it. There we go. And once again, this part is scored so that it folds over on itself and creates a two-sided tail wheel. Obviously the wheel doesn't actually spin, it acts more of a skid than a wheel, but it looks effective and it works well on an aircraft this sort of size. So we're just going to apply a little bit of Yoo-hoo all over the inner face of one side, and also on the inner face of the other side, just on the loop at the top of the structure. There we go. Now we'll fold this over like so, lining them up, and then take it apart again, just so we've got the glue all over the inner face of this part. Then we're going to let that dry out some, and then we can install it onto the keel. That's dried sufficiently, so we can bring this together. But rather than letting it all come together, what we're going to do is just position this onto the rear of the keel here, and you'll notice there is a little area in which it sits. So we'll just position it there and rakes back towards the tail and the wheel, just to sit below the hinge line of the rudder there. And if we squeeze it all together, the yoo-hoo should take effect, and because we've left it to dry, it becomes a contact adhesive, and it should all squeeze together and stay in place without us having to hold it for any length of time. I want to attach a stack of 2mm Depron to the nose, and this incorporates a few parts from our 2mm foam sheet, namely D17, 18 and 19, this little trio of parts here. So let's grab these. And they simply form up one after the other, lining up the tops of them like so, and we just need to glue those three parts together. So let's grab our glue and a nice smear of glue. Notice I didn't actually put the glue down this area here, because the next part that goes on doesn't actually reach down there completely, and this part we will eventually be sanding. So yoo-hoo pour doesn't sand particularly well, it tends to bead up more than anything, so if we can avoid having it in the mix while we're sanding, then all the better. Okay, so that's one part on, and then the next part, once again avoiding areas where we're going to be sanding eventually. So there we go. Okay, now this little stack can then attach itself onto our nose, and the V that's already pre-cut in the part matches up with the V on the nose of the airframe, like so. So let's just make sure they're all stacked up. All I'm doing is inverting the part, the stacked parts, and just making sure the tops of them are all absolutely level. And we can add a little bit of glue and pop that onto the airframe. once again lining the top up and lining that V up. There we go. Right, we'll let that properly set before we start attaching the skin to the airframe.